This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 676, entitled The Surge in Female Masculists, the Next Gender Political Steps. Description. With millions of young men now refusing to date young women, a large and growing number of young women are becoming female masculists, talking about how women oppress men. The next gender political step will be for biconscious masculists to push biconscious feminists to vote with men for the menfairing of the gender laws, so that both sexes are given equal rights and equal obligations, so that men are prepared to be fathers again, so that we don't wipe ourselves out with the crash in the birth rate. Now the flyer itself. The Surge in Female Masculists, the Next Gender Political Steps, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Anyone interested in gender politics must have noticed recently a surge in the number of female masculists, that is, women who talk about men's gender issues, about masculism, about MGTOW, about how men are discriminated against by women. Why this surge in the number of female masculists? To answer this question, it will be helpful to give a bit of history of the rise of the manosphere, that is, men on the internet who talk about men's issues. The largest such group of men are the MGTOWs, MGTOW, that is, men going their own way, that is, men who are so disgusted with the monoconscious sexist bigotry of feminists and the butchery they inflict on divorcing fathers in the divorce courts that the feminists took over in the 70s, that millions of young men in Western countries have now wiped their hands of women, seeing women as so poisoned by feminist ideas, monoconscious feminist ideas, that these women are seen by such men as undateable and hence are ignored, left to rot on the shelf, manless and hence sexless, loveless, babyless and sneered at. Many MGTOWs and masculists are very conscious of the awful treatment of divorcing fathers in the divorce courts that the feminists took over in the 70s, making them more favourable to women's interests and not giving a shit about men's interests. As a result of this monoconscious feminist indifference to divorcing fathers' interests, these feminist divorce court lawyers and judges made divorce so toxic for divorcing fathers that now in many Western countries 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, since they absolutely refuse to face a 1 chance in 4 of being butchered in a fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system. So to decide to live the MGTOW, men going their own way, lifestyle, spending their money on themselves, rather than being divorce raped by hated, fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who see men as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, thus manslaving and divorce raping men for decades of their lives, a huge and hated gender crime as seen through the eyes of masculists. Young men look at what happened to their fathers, their uncles, their older male friends in the divorce courts and vow not to fall into that trap. So consciously decide not to marry and not to give women their sperm, and in many cases of the MGTOWs, not even date or sex women. Masculists go further than the MGTOWs in the sense that masculists see MGTOW as a subset of masculism, that is, in the sense that masculists are often MGTOWs in practice, that is, they reject marriage and paternity due to the toxicity of divorce for married fathers, brackets, e.g., losing custody of his kids with a 90% probability in many Western countries, losing his house to his ex-wife so she can raise her kids in it, losing half his stuff and wealth to her, forced to make child payments to his kids to whom the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges allow him access, for typically only 2 weekends a month, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up, in brackets, FIP, F-I-P, equals financially independent person, so that she continues to parasite off his money, manslaving him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. No wonder Masculists have such a hatred for fluffies, equals traditional women who expect to live off the money and labour of a man, manslaving him, and for one father in four, divorce raping him for decades. Masculists see fluffies as manslaving, divorce raping vermin, and punish them so severely that they effectively exterminate such gender criminal women, forcing them to rot on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, utterly rejected both socially and sexually, forcing these fluffy parasites to FIP up or die. Masculists are a lot more political, aggressive, accusative and hateful than MGTOWs, towards whom the Masculists are sharply critical, seeing MGTOWs as, quote, apolitical wimps, indifferent to the suffering of other men in a genocentric society and lacking solidarity with other men. Masculists, on the other hand, are fighters, verbally abusive and ideologically hateful of gender criminal women, whom in the eyes of Masculists are seen as vermin to be severely punished by being forced to rot on the shelf. Masculists and MGTOW ideas are now spreading widely across the planet, especially in the English-speaking countries, and are really starting to have an effect. For example, young men in the US now are quite well informed of the gender oppression that women commit against men, especially in the divorce courts, and are angry at monoconscious feminists who see gender oppression as a one-way street, and hence feel that as women they have the right to trash men publicly, calling men toxic and rapists and the like. Young men are increasingly aware that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that as the Masculists are teaching them that women's gender crimes against men are in fact far more serious than the rather mild ways that men oppress women. They see that the big three ways that women oppress men, for example, women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced paternity, which the Masculists are ramming home on the internet, are far more serious than the relatively mild ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, patriarchy, etc. So not surprisingly, these young men see monoconscious feminists, in brackets, who know nothing about masculism nor MGTOW, close brackets, as sexist, hypocritical bigots, and choose to have nothing to do with them, refusing to have relationships with them, and not even pumping and dumping them. So disgusted are they with these monoconscious feminists that they feel strongly motivated to punish such women, forcing them to rot on the shelf, effectively exterminating them, at war with them, yelling at these monoconscious feminist women that they should learn some masculism, learn that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that women oppress men far worse, and if they don't become biconscious faster than their monoconscious male feminist boyfriends in their lives, then these women will face a very serious risk of being dumped by these boyfriends once these men had been infected by the Masculist virus taught to them by the Masculist videos on the internet that put Masculist ideas into their heads, thus converting them into biconscious Masculists, who then view the monoconscious sexist bigotry of their feminist girlfriends, partners, wives, as profoundly sexist, hypocritical and bigoted, become disgusted with them and then dump them. This process is now well underway, and we are seeing now TikToks in their hundreds of young women, particularly in their 30s, in tears, in capital letters, because they have been dumped by their boyfriends or ignored, who are now MGTOWs or biconscious, Masculists, who no longer tolerate the monoconscious sexist hypocrisy of their feminist girlfriends and punish them severely, screaming to them to, quote, learn some masculism, you monoconscious, misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunt. Learn that gender oppression is a two-way street and that you women oppress men far worse, or be dumped by your biconscious boyfriend! Exclamation mark. End quote. Millions of women over the next year or so will either be dumped by their biconscious masculist boyfriends or will continue to be totally ignored by the several million MGTOWs that now exist, so that there will be an army of dumped and ignored women in society who are left licking their wounds after being severely mauled by their biconscious masculist boyfriends, or left rotting on the shelf by MGTOWs and falling into depression